I've been hearing a lot of politicians and media members say that, you know what, we're not sure if there's going to be a second spike. So we got to really be careful about how we open things up because we want to avoid a second spike. Well, I'm here to tell you, they're not being honest with you. There will be a second spike, and I'm going to tell you why right now. Welcome to Tuesday's Trees Philosophies. Sign up, subscribe, please, where I go into deep subjects. People tell me I always go too deep. Well, I go deeper, baby. So let's just, without further ado, get into it right now. So why will there be a second spike? Let me tell you why. So the reason that there will be a second spike is that the fundamental physics of the situation have not changed. When we think about why we locked down in the first place, it was in order to reduce the number of people that any one individual comes into contact with. So if any one person came into contact with 100 people on average per day, now we have reduced it to, let's say, 5 people per day, or whatever the number may truly be. But the whole idea is we decrease the number of people you come into contact with, therefore reducing the likelihood of the spread of the virus, right? So when we look at that notion, then that means the inverse must also be true. If we increase the number of people that are coming into contact, then we are increasing the probability of the virus spreading, therefore increasing the number of cases. Thus, the physics of the circumstances. Now, when we look at when we do reopen things, so the question is, will there be a second spike? So what would be the two factors that would actually change the circumstances to mitigate the presence of a second spike? Number one would be the presence of a vaccine, which has not been done. There are some candidates, right? But there's nothing certain. We don't know fundamentally if we will get a vaccine. Number two is whether or not there have been any drugs which will help people that are on their deathbeds and close to dying and come back. Have there been any drugs that have been created? There have been some that have come into fruition, but it's still not widely distributed. It's still not widely available. They still haven't ramped up production. So again, that circumstance remains a non-factor fundamentally as is. And then when we look at the weather, they say that perhaps maybe the weather helps things. So, I mean, we're getting closer to summer in the Northern Hemisphere, thus perhaps that would, again, though, strengthen the case for further reopening. But nonetheless, the fundamental physics stay the same, that when we do reopen, there will be increased contact between individuals. We will be coming into contact more, therefore, higher probability of the virus jumping from one to the next person, therefore increasing the number of cases. What irks me about this situation is that our politicians, our media members, our elites are not being honest with this fact, because if they are asked the question, it is as though they're oblivious of these fundamental things that have already been established. I'm not really saying anything new here, and yet when the question of a second wave comes up, nobody wants to acknowledge that the physics of the situation have not changed. Thus, of course, once things are eased out, there will be a secondary spike. The question is, will that secondary spike be sufficient enough to surpass our medical capacity? Let me take you back to the whole start of this whole thing. I know it's been a while, but the whole point of this thing was to make sure that we don't surpass our medical capacity. And I believe, based on the data, that is the case. And when we look at New York, the epicenter, even they have not surpassed their capacity. They're the epicenter of North America, pretty much, if not the whole world. And they did not surpass their medical capacity. So I think we can be more or less safe, plus minus some, I'm assuming, that we will be okay in terms of medical capacity. So then, thus, the secondary spike question, I just don't want media and politicians to use that as some sort of new revelation, so that when it does take place, they play this game of, oh, look, there's a secondary spike. Look, told you there's going to be oh, look, we're so surprised. Well, no, we shouldn't be surprised. That's what we expected. Now, what are we going to do from here? So again, what irks me is that I just foresee this being used as some sort of tool to further, I don't know, further control or further some sort of political agenda. We have 3 million people unemployed. The goal of this whole thing was to minimize the overburden of our medical system. We've done that. Now, when we're talking about a secondary wave, let's not be surprised. Politicians and media members are lying to us, lying to our faces, and not being honest with the situation. There will be a secondary wave. Don't point to this, when this does happen, don't point to it as though, oh wow, we're so surprised. Because that is exactly what's taking place right now, where things are reopening, and then there's a huge criticism. Oh look, there's secondary wave, secondary wave. Well, no shit, Sherlock. That was the whole reason for the lockdown. Let's be honest with people so that people are aware. Let's be transparent. So let's be really forthcoming with this whole data, because I just don't want it to be used as a club against us again, such that we are told, because we're being put in a situation where there's this always changing goalpost where there doesn't really seem to be a solution, because when we look at the goalposts is, oh, we want to avoid a secondary spike. Well, that essentially means perpetual lockdown, which is unfeasible. So if you're saying that, then you're not a serious individual. I'm sorry, but you're simply not in, you don't really have a place in the conversation, because we cannot further continue this state. So then the question becomes, okay, what level of risk is acceptable? And we need to be acknowledging of the fact that the risk associated with the secondary spike is an acceptable risk, because it will be below our medical threshold, which was the whole point of this whole thing. So let the media and politicians not use that as further justification for the lockdown, because if justification for the lockdown is purely based on the fact that we don't want a second spike, well, that's going to happen. That means you're in favor of perpetual lockdown. And that is where things become messed up, because the original goalpost was we don't want to surpass our medical system. Now the goalpost is we don't want a secondary wave. Well, again, there will be a secondary wave. So that's my Tuesday's Trees Philosophies for you guys. Again, to sum things up, there's going to be a second wave because the physics haven't changed. We don't have a vaccine. We don't have a widely distributed drug. Temperatures may be improving, but all those things would be further reason for reopening. Thus, the goalpost of we continue lockdown because we want to avoid a potential secondary spike, there's going to be a second spike. Let me know what you think. Subscribe, send a like, and let me know. Please, this is really important stuff that I think everybody needs to be talking about. Please share these ideas if you do, connect with them, because the more people that talk about it, the more these ideas will spread, and the more our political leaders will hear our voices. I do believe that each individual does have a voice, and we need to share it with others. Tuesday's Trees Philosophies. Peace.